Welcome to the Secret Weapon podcast. We are so excited today to have Jay Bailey with the
Yes.
Russell Center for Innovation and Entrepreneurship.
In
Thank you
the
for joining us
building. I
in
love it.
the
This is
building.
a really great setup. For those of you that can't see it, they got this place decked out. I'm so happy to be here.
Only to be topped by the Russell Center, right? You
Well, I
guys
don't
have an
know. I mean,
amazing facility.
thank you. Thank you so very much.
So, our focus here and our listeners are curious. Many of them either have small businesses, they're starting a small business, or you know what, they just dream of starting one someday. And they don't really know where to start. And we all
Right.
go off to conferences and hear the same speakers tell us the same advice over and over, but we all leave saying, what do I do with that? So, we want to focus on just, you are surrounded every day
Right.
by innovative entrepreneurs. And through your own experiences, you've learned some of those little secret weapons. Maybe share with us why the Russell Center? You've had such an amazing past. What attracted you to that?
Wow. Why the Russell Center? That's a big question. To put some context around it, I grew up in Atlanta. And part of my story is when I was a 14-year-old kid, I used to steal my mom's car. And I used to drive around Southwest Atlanta because I didn't believe black people could live in houses that looked like that. When you start talking about aspiration, I'm a firm believer, guys, that the only difference between Bankhead and Buckhead, and every city has their north and south side of town. The only difference between the north and the south side of the tracks, access, opportunity, and exposure. Literally, it's impossible to aspire to anything you've never been inspired by. The Russell Center, 54,000 square feet in the heart of the city of Atlanta, the literal building that H.J. Russell, one of the most prolific entrepreneurs this state has ever produced, maybe this country, that he built brick by brick. Think of a black man 50 years ago building a building that was a full city block wide coming out of the Jim Crow South. It's as close to impossible to conceive as me just leaping out of the chair and landing on the moon. But he built the building to literally run his business, but he also built it to be a symbol to the community of what was possible. So this is the place where we give entrepreneurs of color a sense of belonging, a safe space to fail and to fly, to bring the best resources in the region under one roof. As he talked about, there's all kind of activity. If you want to be an entrepreneur, where do you start? Last month, my team found out there were 253 events for small businesses and entrepreneurs last year in Atlanta alone. So if you're trying to run a business, make payroll, keep going, but you got all of these resources everywhere, how do you make any sense of it? There's very little concentration. So I see this as an opportunity to literally give people a pathway. But to your direct question, as we started to do research about our why is this even necessary? What do we need to be focusing on? We paneled 1,500 Black entrepreneurs from around the Southeast, and it isn't just about Black people, but 1,500 entrepreneurs around the Southeast. And I thought access to capital would be their number one need. We had them rank their needs. The number one need was community.
Interesting.
Second was accountability. What we see every day at the Russell Center, and even though we're not open, you were there recently, and it's still a construction site, we're still seeing 600 to 700 people per week coming through our doors. This void of belonging, this void of place and space, I think we're starting to fill it. And I think that matters. So for entrepreneurs of color or entrepreneurs of any stripe, literally building that team, because if you don't account for the isolation and the loneliness and the depression and the anxiety that goes along with charting your own course, if you don't have a supportive community around you, literally, that's just a recipe for failure. And I think at the Russell Center, my main objective now is around building community.
So you said most people don't know what's possible.
Right.
So what is possible? What are some of the stories that you see every day coming in and out of the Russell Center?
Yeah.
What are some, for examples,
No
of
doubt.
these great innovative folks?
It's I'll shout out one of our stellar stakeholders, and we don't call them members, we call them stakeholders. Anytime I greet them, I tell them welcome home. I want them to feel that way when they walk through the door, have a transformative experience of belonging. Dahl Levant, she's a double Harvard superhero, went to Douglas High School, the most unlikely story. But she's got a water company that measures water quality for municipalities and governments, et cetera. Literally, if you Google the name, she's on Inc. magazine, Forbes, Google, like literally the Google homepage guys, they featured her one day, like where they do like Harriet Tubman and Martin Luther King and Doll Levant. Revolutionary technology, just super duper sharp, on her way to creating a billion-dollar company in a real way. But even on that trajectory, she found herself at the Russell Center because she needed community. She wanted to be around people that would hold her accountable, that would keep her optimistic when times got tough. And she's just one of many. I try to get as many people as I can to get in that center just to see her.
Just to be near
Just to be near her.
Maybe it'll rub off.
Just the inspiration of being around someone that did it. Because one of the things in the community that I'm trying to build, the narrative for, and when I talk about race too, for all the listeners, I'm not talking about it from an emotional space. I look at it like an economist. And if the city of Atlanta leads the country in income inequality, we lead the country in economic immobility. A child born into poverty in Atlanta has less than a 4% chance of reaching the middle class. And the hard story, if we're really courageous about our leadership, talk about this week, Owen, really courageous about our approach. In the city of Atlanta, there are no poor white neighborhoods. There are no failing Latino schools. There are no Asian ghettos. So when you talk about moving the economic needle, moving the prosperity needle, moving the sustainability needle without a strategy that's directly and independently focused on the segment of the greatest need, I think you're being intellectually disingenuous in your approach to try to move the needle. So I'm focusing on African American entrepreneurs because everybody else is on a forward trajectory. And I think we lose GDP and we're certainly stifling growth if we don't look at 54% of our population that's not really adding to the community at full speed. That's my charge, to try to move the needle for the whole city by focusing on where we need to focus. But it's that. I say that because when I talked about that access, opportunity, exposure, there's a cap. I'm 43 years old. I was telling people this story the other day. I've been betting people $20, and I had to spend it in New York the other week. But I've been betting people $20 for 3 months easily. I'm 43, and I've never seen a character in a movie or a television show that was a wealthy black businessman. You literally can't become what you've never seen. There's no secret that God equally distributes brilliance, talent, and genius. If you believe in any kind of power, you got to believe he puts it everywhere. So how is it the kids in Buckhead want to be doctors, lawyers, accountants, consultants to run companies? And kids over in Bankhead want to be rappers, athletes, and dope dealers? It's not rocket science. You don't need a Harvard study. You literally become what you see. And literally from those examples, like a doll who's STEM incarnate, who's business incarnate, and she's just a certified boss. You should bring her in here because she'd do one hell of a podcast. To see her, to know that it's possible, to know that I can dream beyond just $100,000 salary. I can literally think about having a $1 billion company. And I love that at the Russell Center, because of what Mr. Russell did, coming out of Summerhill, Atlanta, at one point creating the 4th largest African-American owned company in the history of America. To know that was possible is part of my equation for success. I've got to retrain an entire community to see value in their own reflection. And that part's powerful.
Yeah.
That the only value proposition right now for success is how fast can I move out of my community? Because I don't really see any value in my community.
So it's interesting you mentioned success, because I think when you talk about entrepreneurship,
Sure,
the words success and failure
yeah,
always come up. Maybe share a little bit about your roller coaster of success and failure, but then how do we take the conversation beyond success to significance?
And that's my whole story. The short version is started my first business at 12. I bought my first house at 19, made my first $1 million at 26. Was living in a private gated community at 27, lost everything, and sleeping in a 9x9 storage unit at 28, 29 years old. By the world standards, I had it all the cars, the clothes, the parties. I was living the lifestyle that I saw on MTV Cribs. And quite honestly, that is a side story. The reason I bought the house is because I was watching MTV Cribs and I saw Usher Raymond had a house in this neighborhood called Country Club of the South.
And you had to go.
Because I thought that that's where wealthy people lived. And literally went to the bank that I used to work at, got a $100,000 cashier's check, drove my Mercedes S500 up to the country club of the South, bribed the guard $100 to go through the gate, found a house on Old Southwick Pass. So if you're in the neighborhood, guys, it's the same street, Old Southwick Pass. Found a house on the hill, called the realtor for my car phone, said I had a $100,000 cashier's check. I can close in 2 weeks. How soon can you be here with the contract? I didn't have good money role models. I didn't have a support network. I didn't have a community of people that could help me grow and scale. Here I am, a kid that's entrepreneurial. I had lost a whole lot of people in my life. So that's another piece of it as well. I bought the house because I had lost my mother and I didn't have a home to go home to for Christmas. These things that kind of drive your moves and your decisions. I'm a firm believer that loss creates leaders. And if you've never really been on your back, have you ever really seen the sun? Most of us take walking upright for granted and never look up.
That loss creates leaders. Wow.
Oh yeah. And if you've never been flat on your back, lost it all, and you have nowhere else to look up, and that's that thing about failure, right? And this is why I even focus on the African American community. Black folks, we have a very, very, it's a dangerous fall. It's hard to bounce back. My grandmother may not understand me leaving this good job to actually go try to do something new. My dad say, why don't you just go get a job at the post office instead of doing all this fool stuff? Why'd you leave Goldman Sachs to literally go start a company? You had a great job. It's a cultural thing. Mm-hmm. And so now this equation of failure, if I fail hard, I may not be able to get back up. That's why the community is so important. When you talked about success and significance, that's where it hit for me. Thumbing through a photo album. I'm living in a room that's about this size smaller though. And I'm seeing all these random kids and pictures with my family. And I don't know who they are. And it finally clicks. When my mother was living, she worked for the juvenile justice system. And she knew then, like I live by now, you take a kid in a bad environment, no role models, no exposure, compounded hopelessness for 10 or 15 years. Why are you surprised he's got a gun to your head? She used to pluck kids out of lockup in halfway houses, bring them to Christmas dinner, put them in a table, show them what love looked like and felt like. And she used to do it every year. And all these memories are just rushing back in my head. And if you were there with us at the table, Laura, she'd be like, hey, Laura, grab that box for me, baby. And Laura go grab that box. And before she could look down, you see L-A-R-A in big letters. That's how you spell your name, right?
Yep.
L-A-R-A in big letters on that box because it was for you. And you wanted to feel seen. One of the most depressing things in the world this Christmas season, go buy Toys for Tots bucket. And you'll see those of us with more affluence literally buying the cheapest toys we can for those kids who don't have. We just throw it in a bucket. Now a 14-year-old kid's supposed to have fun with their stuffed tomato. She used to make me make my Christmas list in August so she could save up money in December to buy a kid something they would really want. It really hit me hard because then I started to think by the world's standards I've been successful. Cars, the clothes, the houses, and all this other stuff. But I had zero significance. I had done nothing to put a dent in this world. There was nothing that had any legacy attached to it. I'd spent $10,000 in a nightclub in one night, but there's no scholarship in my mom's name. How are we starting to think about investing for generations? Like literally being in the cycle of consumerism to give this appearance of wealth. But the cost of perception is way too high for this community.
Right.
The cost of perception with no real depth or any wealth, it started making no sense to me anymore. So once I turned life over to this whole life of significance, things just started to take off. And I had true purpose and I had a North Star when I didn't have one before. I was literally just making money to be perceived as something that I was watching on TV.
And do you see, if you look at the businesses that are at the Russell Center that you think have the greatest chance of success,
right.
Do you think they have significance as an overlay?
I want to build a culture of significance. Yeah. And if they don't, they're going to be in a community that only supports significance. And therefore, they, by osmosis, just being in the energy. You can't think about your first million without thinking about what you're going to do with it to serve community. I want to build a covenant. Like literally for every stakeholder that we have there, we want to co-design a covenant. What is your responsibility to yourself, your family, and this thing that you want to create, grow, or scale? What is our collective commitment to the community that we're building inside the walls of RCIE, to ourselves? But lastly, what's our collaborative and collective responsibility, if not obligation, to the community that exists outside these walls? And I need everybody to live under that. And if you build that kind of community, we'll be able to make some good things happen.
I think what'll happen is because of the community and because you create that mentality of significance, you will see a higher success rate in the businesses in the Russell Center than in the general population.
I sure hope so.
I think that's true. I
sure
think
hope
that
so.
businesses that are timeless have as a lens significance. They're not just trying to be successful because success is finite. That just means you won the game, you got the job, you won the award. Significance is infinite.
Absolutely.
It means
I
you
love
did
that.
something that impacted somebody else, that impacted somebody else, that impacted somebody else. And when you talk about failure, early on when I was starting Now Account, I remember sitting down and having lunch with Sarah Blakely and her father. And Sarah Blakely, obviously very successful female entrepreneur, first self-made female billionaire.
Wow, yeah.
And I remember her dad telling a story that every Friday at the dinner table, he would ask Sarah and her brother, what did you fail at this week?
Wow.
And if they didn't fail at anything, they got punished.
Wow.
And I thought, you punish somebody for not failing? And he said, if you didn't fail, you couldn't possibly have gotten outside of your comfort zone. But I think you give a very different perspective because it's easy to encourage people to fail when they feel like there's a support system around them.
Absolutely.
But the world you described coming from, there wasn't a support structure. And so encouraging someone to fail is less than genuine if there's no support structure and failure means you're out.
Absolutely.
So thank you for sharing.
That's a
I've always
beautiful-
encouraged failure, but you've given me a different way to think about you can only encourage failure if the person has a support structure.
But that's a beautiful story, but a beautiful testament of why we're doing what we're doing. There's no mistake that she is who she is. To
Right.
have a dad every Friday pushing her in that way, to get her thinking that way at a young age, even Mr. Russell, it's no rocket science. It's not Harvard study. It's literally he became a plasterer. Why? Because his dad was. I always talk about Ryan Wilson, the owner of the Gathering Spot. Beautiful story of a 26-year-old that shook up the world with this thing that he created. But his dad and his mom were very successful business owners. He didn't need to take an MBA. He lived with one. The environments that we're in, when you talk about failure and what that means to people, we've got to change that dynamic. And I love that story. Love that story.
Well, I think so. What I've taken away from your stories, loss creates leaders. I think that is phenomenal. But I think you also balance that by recognizing that if someone fails or experiences a loss and they don't have community around them, how can we possibly expect them to come back?
Yep.
And yet the world needs more entrepreneurs. We need more people creating value. So if you can create community through the Russell Center, and I think that's just the epicenter. I think the Russell Center may take up one city block, but I think its impact is going to be a whole lot broader than that.
That's the vision, indeed.
To create a community where you can fail.
Absolutely. And it's necessary. I think that we lose GDP every year by not getting the best out of underrepresented populations and communities. The next Tesla, the next Facebook, the next Google, the next Now account is sitting in somebody's brain in a community where they don't believe that it's possible.
Yeah.
They don't believe that they have the opportunity to fail and fly. And we're all worse off by that.
So the secret weapon is find yourself a community.
If
you don't have one,
community, yeah.
find yourself a community.
Sure.
If you're in Atlanta, come down to the Russell Center.
We
If
got
you're
you.
not, call us on the phone, right?
Sure.
But even if you're in another city and you can't make it to the Russell Center, you can find a community. Find somebody who can support you, encourage that failure, and make sure that if you truly want to build a sustainable, long-term, impactful business, that you ask yourself what the significance it is,
Amen.
not just the success.
I love it.
Thank you.
Of course. No, this has been great. Thank you.
This is fantastic, and we hope you'll join us next time on Secret Weapons. We're going to just have to have Jay back because there's a whole lot more secret weapons for those.
Let's do it. I love it, guys. I love it.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.